Hello, I'm Frédéric Serre. This is number 0727 of the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder, and it comes to you right now.
The following program is brought to you in living color.
Now, it's time for an eclectic mix of interviews and some of the oddest news stories you'll ever hear. It's the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder.
Hey there, hi there, ho there! Peter Anthony Holder here with you, and yes, this is indeed another edition of the Stuff File program, number 0727. And coming up on this edition of the Stuff File program, you'll meet Markus Pukonen, who spent the last 8 years traveling around the globe, but he did it without a plane, train, or automobile. In fact, he made the trek without involving anything that had a motor, even an elevator. Why did this globetrotter want to travel this way?
Because of my travels in other parts of the world, I had seen how my privileged life here in Canada and the things that I buy were affecting communities all over the world. And I just became much more connected to the idea of the global community, which inspired me to be more active politically and environmentally. But at the same time, I had no interest in working in an office doing that work. And so I tried to figure out how I could combine what I am passionate about and still work with these organizations and basically go on this crazy adventure, use the attention that I get to raise support for these organizations.
Marc Hartzman from WeirdHistorian.com is here with his regular monthly visit. The story for July features miracle cures, which of course never work.
In July of 1901, this was a time when a woman named Mrs. Ida Anderson claimed to have bought a product called the oxydonor, and she said, "In 3 weeks, I was entirely cured of dropsy, 10 years standing. My feet and ankles were terribly swollen, and I was hardly able to be on my feet, and it was with difficulty that I could walk across the house. Since then, I have walked 2 miles at one time. I can gladly recommend it to those who are afflicted." So this snake oil was called the oxydonor. According to Ida and many others, this thing was a miracle cure for most any ailment.
And there's lots and lots of Stuff File news, and of course, an idiot of the day. The guest slater, the person who told you this was show number 0727, was Frédéric Serre, a cartoonist, a writer, a translator, a photographer, a media relations guy for Quebec's RCMP union, and an occasional actor. He does everything. It's somewhat annoying when you think about it, especially considering that he's a cartoonist who is excellent at that. I can't draw a tree. Anyway, thank you very much, Frédéric, for doing the guest slate on this edition of the Stuff File program, a show that is listener-supported, fan-funded radio that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Well, let's get right to the stuff. Multiple wrecks tied up northbound I-95 in Bridgeport, Connecticut on July 17th, all attributed to one cause. A tractor-trailer was leaking human waste onto the roadway, which caused a motorcyclist to lose control and crash.
What's that smell?
Several vehicles crashed into each other or concrete barriers on the slippery roads, and another truck skidded into a state police cruiser, which then rammed into another cruiser. No one was seriously hurt in the pileup. The driver was charged with reckless endangerment and reckless driving, as officers believe he knew of the gross leak, but kept driving. Wow. So in other words, that trucker literally took a dump on the highway. To demonstrate the deadly heat inside a closed car, the staff of the National Weather Service in Midland, Texas, baked a batch of chocolate chip cookies on a car's dashboard on July 18th.
Nothing says lovin' like my chocolate chip cookies. Woo-hoo!
While it was 105 degrees outside, the dashboard registered 190 degrees, high enough to bake the cookies in about 4.5 hours, said NWS employees on their Facebook page. Even though ours weren't golden brown, we can confirm that they are done and delicious. You know, they always say in the southwestern part of the U.S. that it's a dry heat, but if you have to drive your car, even a convertible, while wearing oven mitts, then that's a problem. and it's only getting worse with climate change. 40-year-old Michael Raduga, founder of the Phase Research Center in Russia, but, and this is an important critical note, not a doctor or a neurosurgeon, nearly lost his life in June when he tried to implant a chip in his brain on his own in his living room in Kazakhstan. Raduga lost more than a liter of blood in his quest to control his dreams. He said he practiced on 5 sheep's brains and watched hours of neurosurgery on YouTube before starting on his own head. Said Raduga, "During the first 30 minutes, I was ready to give up many times because I was afraid I could just lose consciousness. I finished the surgery, I took a shower, and I worked for 10 hours straight. People didn't know." Yeah, that sounds normal.
With my own hands. With my own hands. You're crazy! Crazy, am I? We'll see whether I'm crazy or not.
But neurosurgeon Alex Green of the University of Oxford wasn't having it. He said, "This is an extremely dangerous thing to do. We are probably decades away from being able to synthesize new experiments." Really? That's the takeaway that Dr. Alex Green has from this? Not the part where this guy did brain surgery on himself? Yeah. Anyway, frog lady Helen Claypool of Kirksville, Missouri, passed away in December of 2022. So, the time has come to liquidate her collection of frogs. Claypool has more than 15,000 frogs, so many that she and her late husband, Don, who was nicknamed Toad, had to build an addition on their house. She started collecting at age 6 and kept 47 logbooks documenting each one, complete with photos. The Claypools even opened their home to the public as Helen's House of Frogs Museum. Now the whole frog fantasy is on the auction block. So, she kept frogs all of her life until she, croaked. Well, it's good to have a hobby, I guess. Notre Dame quarterback Sam Hartman, who last year sat out some of the year with Wake Forest University, underwent surgery in August of 2022 to remove blood clots and the rib closest to his collarbone.
The backbone connected to you, shoulder bone connected to you, neck bone connected to you, head bone, now hear the word of the Lord.
Not anymore. What to do with that extra rib? Hartman's mom, a nurse, is making a necklace for him with the bone. Said Hartman, "It's actually clean. It is well on its way to becoming a necklace. I asked her to try and make it like a puka shell type deal with the rib-like shark's tooth at the end." Hartman said the jewelry might appear in a couple of pre-game warm-ups. "It won't be worn a lot," he said. Oh, dem bones.
Them bones gonna walk around, now hear the word of the Lord.
And finally, in this section of Stuff File News, before we get to our first guest here on this edition of the Stuff File program, we have one more story. And, the bells signify it's time once again for the Darwin File.
I am the Grim Reaper. I am death.
A man has died after punching through a window at a bar in Beach Park, Illinois. The Lake County Sheriff's Office deputies responded at around 2 a.m. for a person who suffered a critical injury at the establishment. Initial reports say the man was at the bar where he got into an argument with another person. He was then escorted out by security. After being taken outside, the man punched a window near the front of the door, causing a severe laceration to his arm and bleeding significantly. The man, identified as 32-year-old Jonathan Banks of Chicago, was taken to hospital where he was pronounced dead in the emergency room. An autopsy by the coroner's office revealed that Banks died from sharp force injuries. Lake County Sheriff's detectives are investigating. The injury appears to be self-inflicted. You figure? It always seems so much easier to put your fist through a window in the movies. And that's one of the reasons why the tree of life is often self-pruning.
I have come for you. I am death.
Anyway, let's get to our first guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program, shall we? Over the last 8 years, Markus Pukonen has traveled around the globe for a total of more than 73,000 kilometers, and he did it without a plane, train, or automobile, nothing with a motor. During that time, he never even rode an elevator. Markus joins us now via Zoom from Toronto to talk about his amazing journey. Hi, Markus.
Hi, Peter. How are you?
Just tickety-boo. Thanks very much for being on the program with us. So how did this start for you 8 years ago? What was your aha moment when you said, I've got to do this?
It was actually a much longer process than just 8 years ago. I'd say that the initial idea came about 15 years ago. And that moment was when my dad called me up and told me he had 2 weeks to live. He had been diagnosed with a rare form of acute myeloid leukemia. And unless he did some chemo, he was not going to survive long. At the time, I was fighting forest fires in British Columbia. And ironically, as I was flying home in a plane, I penned out this idea, which for me, it basically answered the question, what would I want to be doing with my life if I found out that I was going to die in 2 weeks? And how could I live my life with no regrets? And so the Roots of Change journey, expedition, project, organization all came together on that flight home to see my dad. And basically combines everything I'm passionate about, puts it into one project, creates my dream job, although I have no money. It worked out.
Okay, so how did you come up with the idea that you were going to travel around the world without the benefit of anything motorized?
So I really love being athletic, being outside in natural environments. And I had done a bicycle trip and it felt very rewarding to travel by bicycle. I love to travel. And I also, because of my travels in other parts of the world, I had seen how my life, my privileged life here in Canada and the things that I buy were affecting communities all over the world. And I just became much more connected to the idea of the global community, which inspired me to be more active politically and environmentally. But at the same time, I had no interest in working in an office doing that work. And so I tried to figured out how I could combine what I am passionate about and still work with these organizations and basically go on this crazy adventure, use the attention that I get to raise support for these organizations. And in doing that, I didn't want to be supporting the big corporations that they're often going against. I know in some way you always are in this world, but I figured, I will not support oil and gas by traveling by motors. Yeah, and that just made it a whole other level of challenging, which I love, and adventure. And it also, I realized it actually enabled me to slow down. I was forcibly slowed down at times, and that just enables you to experience the journey that much more.
Okay, so I understand the idea of no planes, no trains, or automobiles, but you never even rode an elevator in that period of time?
Yeah. So that wasn't actually a plan from the start. But once I started doing the no motor thing, I'm telling people I'm not using motors, so I might as well just be completely to my word with that point. And so an elevator uses motors, and so I figured I would not use any motorized transportation. I have used washing machines, coffee grinders, things like this, but nothing to move myself. And the elevator thing, most of the time I'm not in cities, so it's not a big deal. But there was some cities which it was quite challenging to move around because of the amount of tall buildings, specifically Singapore. I actually went up, I think, the most stories there to 57th floor of the Marina Bay Sands to go to the infinity pool there.
Okay, so at what point, or at any point, did you suddenly say to yourself, I didn't anticipate this was going to happen? Like, for instance, I saw one scene where you were being videotaped on a pogo stick.
Yeah. I mean, it was that was actually anticipated. That was one of the things before I started the trip that I sort of planned, because a friend said, "Oh, you should pogo stick. There's another form of unmotorized transportation." And I was like, "Okay, yeah, I'll pogo stick." And then I made a decision to go 10 kilometers on one, which is quite enthusiastic and I'd say aggressive on my part, because I actually did not have any confidence. That's the only thing I said I would do, that I had zero confidence in my ability to actually go 10K. But because I had spent the 3 weeks previous on a hand cycle, it's very similar motion in the shoulders. It's all about the shoulders moving forward on a pogo stick. And, I was hopping through Winnipeg with this big smile on my face because it just felt so ridiculous. And I managed to do it after 5 hours. I made it through Winnipeg. So that was actually expected. In terms of unexpected parts of this journey, I would say the amount of pollution in Asia was unexpected, and the joy and health that you can get from cycling outside was sort of lost on me, because I spent so much time on dirty, overly polluted roads, black exhaust spewing in my face. And even when I got into the Himalayas, where I was thinking I would escape into the fresh air of the mountains, all the industry down in India still sweeps up into the Himalaya, and you get smog up high in Nepal, up where these Mount Everest and these big mountains are. So that was pretty unexpected and a bit sad.
When you experience that smog and that pollution in those places, did it solidify what your goal was even more?
It did. It did. It also, I'd say, was a bit overwhelming, because I felt at those moments, I felt very small compared to the scale of what is going on in those countries like China and India. The scale of their development is just so massive and so beyond me, it felt like. But at the same time, I mean, I guess it made me feel like I was doing the right thing. And yeah, it's tough. It's really tough. I mean, everything in India is a bit more challenging. It's just so chaotic. And but because there's so many people, and there is so much potential power behind the people, and the amount of money that exists floating around in these places, I think there is so much potential for that economy to take a completely different direction and lead the world in safer, more sustainable technologies. At the moment, it's not happening, but I feel like it could happen within a decade. So there's hope there as well.
I'm sure you were physically fit when you started this whole experience, but how buff were you after 8 years of traveling like this?
Well, I mean, my muscles move depending on the form of transport that I'm using. So, I just recently, I cycled a bunch. Before that, I was stand-up paddleboarding a bunch. I walked the Appalachian Trail for 1,000 miles. So, I wouldn't say I'm in the best shape in my life, that's for sure. I've done a lot of repetitive strain on the body. So, I mean, I'd say I'm sort of average. I haven't really lost or gained weight. My muscle just has moved around my body. I am, 8 years older, so I haven't gotten younger. More pain, I'd say, in parts, but generally feel pretty healthy, although I'm questioning whether I have Lyme disease right now, because I do have some symptoms of co-infection of Lyme disease, and it's quite common on the Appalachian Trail. So I'm waiting to get some blood tests to see if that's actually the case.
Well, now that you've finished this experience, have you gotten back into either a plane, train, or automobile?
I have not yet. Yeah, so I finished up the trip on Saturday, last Saturday. So it's been, I guess, almost 8-9 days. And I'm contemplating what I'm going to use. I'm thinking about maybe going to Canada's Wonderland and getting on the roller coasters as my first introduction. I think that would be a pretty fun way to do it. But besides that, in the city here, I much prefer to ride a bicycle. I can avoid the traffic and go faster than the traffic in the city. So there's no need for me to get on any motorized transportation here. The challenge is when I want to leave. I have some invitations to go to some cottages this weekend even. So getting out of the city, that's going to be a more challenging idea for me. And maybe I'll get in a car. But I do plan on going across the country to Tofino, and I'm going to take a train that way.
During the 8 years that you were traveling, what kind of experiences did you have with either media or people who became fans of yours on social media?
Wonderful experiences. I'd say some of the best experiences, though, were from people who just had no idea who I was, complete strangers. They just see a random foreigner on a bicycle and and they open up their houses, open up their, even, abandon their beds so that I could sleep on their beds. And this happened in every country I went to all around the world. And yeah, just beautiful experiences. And then towards the end of the journey, I met some YouTube fans who were very, very kind, and one lent me a bicycle to get from the Appalachian Trail into New York City. He said I could keep the bicycle, but I did end up shipping it back to him. And then another YouTube fan who had a sailboat on Lake Ontario accompanied us as we kayaked across from St. Catharines to Toronto 2 days before I finished the journey. So that was great to have a sailboat as support and made it a little bit safer.
What percentage of your journey would you say you traveled completely alone?
Ooh, that's a large percentage. I'd say close to 90%.
Did it get lonely during that period of time?
And so that's actually the 90% of traveling. So I wasn't always moving. So I would stop in places and spend more time with people and, grow friends and community. But when I was actually traveling, I would say 90%. And no, I'm very prepared to be alone when I'm going out to sea for 40 days or 20 days or crossing an ocean. I'm prepared, and I'm okay with being alone. The times that I feel lonely are when I arrive in a city and, there's people everywhere, but nobody even acknowledges my presence or says hello. Cities are just generally not the best places to be a foreigner or a stranger. So, people are they don't talk to strangers in cities. Whereas you get out into the countryside and everybody says hello. They're curious. They want to, be friends instantly. So it's a big difference. And that's the case around the world. It's not just a Canadian thing. It's the same thing in Asia often. But so, yeah, lonely in cities sometimes.
We are talking to Markus Pukonen, who spent the last 8 years traveling the world without the benefit of anything motorized. We're going to continue talking with Markus. We're going to take a quick break and come back on the other side. This is the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder. Stay tuned.
There's still more guests, more news, and an idiot of the day coming your way on the Stuff File program. Stay tuned. The Stuff File program is a listener-supported, fan-funded radio show that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Sign up and find out about our rewards program. Being a patron doesn't have to be a long-term commitment. There's absolutely no obligation. You could join today and end whenever you'd like. But the time we have your support would be so greatly appreciated. We'd also love to hear your thoughts about the show and even your ideas for rewards. Join us for the ride. Join us at patreon.com/The Stuff File program. You're listening to the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder. It's way more fun and a lot healthier than licking all the buttons on an elevator.
And we are talking with Markus Pukonen, who for the last 8 years traveled around the globe for a total of more than 73,000 kilometers, and he did it without a plane, train, or automobile, nothing with a motor. And I've got to know, Markus, during the 8 years, what was your most harrowing experience? And also, on the other side of the coin, what was the one place where you said, gee, I could just stay here?
Well, there's only one place that I could see myself living right now. The place I most feel at home, and the place where, I will go back to, and that's Tofino. There's nowhere else I'd rather live on the planet. That's where I was living before I started the trip, and that's where I'm going to go back and live. So yeah, here in Canada, Tofino. In terms of, sorry, did you say the most harrowing experience?
Yes.
That's hard for me to answer. There's been a lot, but I guess one time in the whole 8 years that I've only considered ending the journey was when I was on my first sail on a 27-foot sailboat that I had bought in India, and I was on my way to the Seychelles. It was about a 1,500-mile sail. It should have only taken 2 to 3 weeks, but after over 4 weeks out there, I had very little wind. I was for the first time experiencing some pretty strong winds. They felt like hurricane force winds, although they weren't even close to that. It was just the first time I had experienced strong winds on this boat and on this sail in 30 days with very calm winds. And so my boat started reacting all differently. It started making all these scary sounds, started taking on water. I was starting to get exhausted because I had to manually steer the boat, which I don't usually do. And in addition to that, my girlfriend, who I had met during the lockdown in India, was waiting for me in the Seychelles. And so all of this combined, I was just exhausted, stressed. And it was the only time on the journey where I was like, maybe I should hit the eject button and call it quits. But in that moment, there was not a seaworthy, like a good seamanship way to do that, because I wasn't actually in emergency situation. My boat was floating. I was still healthy. And eventually the wind got better, and I got some rest and continued sailing towards the Seychelles, and everything was okay and continued on.
Wow. So what is next for you?
So next, from the beginning of this journey, I've always planned to make a film, a feature-length documentary. So I'm going to be working on that for the next 2 years, in addition to writing a book about my experiences. So I'll be writing a book, making a movie, and surfing in Tofino, where I have some family and friends, and looking forward to just staying put and eating healthy food and breathing in the fresh air of Canada.
Okay, so you travel for 8 years. You're going to spend the next 2 years, like you say, planning to do this documentary and writing a book. How did you manage to sustain yourself over the decade that this was all taking place and the 2 years that are coming up? How did you manage to sustain yourself and earn a living, if at all?
Yeah, so I've been very low budget. My annual budget has been under $20,000 Canadian a year. So I guess that's under the poverty line here in Canada. But elsewhere in the world, it's enough to get me food and a place to stay often. So I was able to survive, and most of that came through crowdfunding campaigns where I resold the book and the film, and just from people in my community who sent me a couple dollars every month for the past 8 years. So because I've been sharing it, and also I started a YouTube channel when I was 3 years into the journey, and that has brought in a little bit to keep me going. But mostly it's just through my community that I've had since I was a young kid, but also have met along the way. Some of my biggest supporters are just people who I met while canoeing across Ontario, actually, and around the world.
During the time that you were traveling, besides the fact that there were no motorized vehicles of any kind, was there anything that you truly missed while you were away, or did you just realize that a lot of the things you may have missed was, material, and therefore you didn't really need them?
I've been living this sort of lifestyle for a long time, so I'm very used to the nomadic traveling lifestyle. So that transition wasn't that hard for me, and I wouldn't say the big thing that I missed was access to fresh, clean food. When you're traveling like this, you have to be very flexible with your diet, and that means that I was eating food that was not always the healthiest for me, and so that was a bit of a challenge for sure. If anything, that would be what I missed, and in addition to that, surfing.
But you could have surfed.
Missed my surfboard.
Okay, but I mean, there's a lot of places. I mean, I would assume, since you like surfing, that you didn't go 8 years without surfing. There were a lot of places you could probably surf, correct?
There were quite a few places, but it's not as easy as it sounds. And I mean, I used to surf every day for 2 to 4 hours before I started this trip. And so, surfing 2 months in a year or less for me is not a lot of surf. And so that there's some great surf that I experienced in Hawaii and Indonesia and Tobago recently, but really out of those 3 big surf places, that was all I had in the 8 years. And that was, just a couple months at a time. So not a lot.
Well, the other side of the coin of the question I was going to ask, you might have just answered, and that is, when you finally got home, what was the first thing that you wanted to do that you missed?
Well, unfortunately, I can't surf here in Toronto, so no surf yet. I mean, the biggest thing getting to Toronto was seeing friends and family that I hadn't seen in 8 years. And so hugging everybody is the biggest thing that I've wanted to do. And it's pretty amazing to see people after 8 years. A lot of people have aged into their 40s now from their early 30s. And so I was expecting a lot of people to look a lot older, but pretty much everybody looked exactly the same, although they often had a kid or two in tow. So it's been pretty special to meet my new my new nieces and nephews and friends' kids that I'd never met, but have grown into little humans since I've been gone.
I found you because there was a story on the news about what you had accomplished, and I'm just wondering how you felt about the media attention that you garnered while you were on the trip and certainly near the end of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's been good. Towards the end of it, in the past couple of weeks, there's been a lot of interviews, and so I've thankfully there was a bit of a gap between speaking to you, because there was a while there where I was saying things and it just, the words coming out of my mouth were almost just, they didn't mean anything because I'd said the same thing so much. And I generally just like to keep it spontaneous and fresh and don't have a serious particular message that I'm trying to get across. I just hope people take their own thoughts and inspiration from what I've done. And if it means then bicycle to work once a week or just use a little less motorized transportation and stay healthier outside, then I'm pretty happy about what I've done.
What do you think your dad would have said about all of this?
Well, I think he would do exactly what I'm doing now. He would have laughed at first, because I did tell him before he passed. He passed away 6 months after he was diagnosed. And I told him, and he sort of just laughed it off, because he wanted me to get a real job and settle down, but that was never my style. So he would have, at first, I think he would have been like, "What are you doing? You're nuts, insane." And then eventually he would have come around and been a big support for me, and probably would have sailed with me at some point on the journey, because that was a big passion of his. I think he'd be pretty proud. I think both my parents would.
Your website is rootsofchange.org, correct?
That's correct.
And what exactly does that mean for you?
The website, or like
just the name, Roots of Change?
Oh. Well, I think it accurately sort of describes what my mission is and what my mission has been to do. Make a route around the planet and inspire change as I go.
And what do you want people to get from going to your website, even now that the trip is over?
Well, I actually hope to completely overhaul and change my website so that people get more out of it, because I haven't really done much to it since I started the trip. I just haven't had the space or the time to do so. But in the long run, I hope people find inspiration from what I've done, but also from the organizations that I've connected with, and just come to realize that there are people all over the world who are not giving up on our species or this planet and are working hard to create a better future for us all. And so I want to make that more visually distinct and I guess just available for people to see this. There's opportunities to volunteer, organize, and help all over the world, and it's just a matter of making a little effort to do so.
Well, congratulations on all you've done. I would assume that one of the next things you're going to be is the ambassador for the Tofino Board of Tourism.
But my sister is actually a star out there. I mean, sorry, my niece is actually a star out there right now, because she's one of the best female surfers in Canada. So I'm going to leave that to her out in Tofino.
Well, again, congratulations on what you've accomplished. It seems like you can accomplish just about anything you want, and maybe you'll also bring back the popularity of pogo sticks as well.
There's one thing I do. I hope that's it.
Markus, thank you very much for taking the time to be on the program with us. It's a pleasure and an honor to have a chance to talk to you.
Thanks a lot, Peter. Cheers.
Markus Pukonen, who has traveled around the globe, and he did it without a motor. You can go to my website at thestuffile.com to the page for this show, which is show number 0727, and you'll find links to Markus's site, which also leads to links to his YouTube page. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
Got something for the mailbag? Drop Peter a line. He'd love to hear from you. Send your email to mailbag@thestufffile.com. And remember, stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's mailbag@thestufffile.com. Or catch up with him on Twitter or Facebook. There's more Stuff File coming your way in just a few moments.
Hey, how would you like to become a patron of the Stuff File program? It's easy to do. By going to patreon.com and becoming a patron, you help to make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. And if you become a regular patron, as a Patreon reward, I'll share with you an electronic version of my book, Great Conversations, my interviews with two men on the moon and a galaxy of stars. You've heard me say on many occasions about the myriad of celebrities I've had the chance to talk to that are contained in my book, which is published by Bear Manor Media. You've also heard me mention that some of the celebrities in my book, and many others, can be heard on our page at patreon.com. If you've been on the fence about joining Patreon, let me try to pull you over to our side. Join Patreon and claim your copy of Great Conversations, my interviews with two men on the moon and a galaxy of stars. Sign up at patreon.com/The Stuff File program.
You're listening to the Stuff File program. It's a different kind of show. It's like a brown pair of shoes in a world of tuxedos. Here's Peter Anthony Holder.
And still to come on the program, we'll talk a little bit about fraud with Marc Hartzman from WeirdHistorian.com as he talks about miracle cures. We also have an Idiot of the Day coming your way, and we've got more Stuff File news right here, right now, and basically all of it deals with fraud. The U.S. Social Security Administration and the U.S. Department of Defense Financing Accounting Service have been sending monthly pension and annuity payments to Donald Zompak's mother. The problem? She's dead. She's been dead for more than 3 decades. Zompak, who is 65, failed to report the death of his mother to the Social Security Administration. The agency says that Zompak fraudulently transferred the title to his mother's Poway, California home and then filed for bankruptcy, but didn't disclose his ownership of the home or that he was receiving government benefits. After his mother's death, officials say, Zompak kept her bank accounts open and forged her signature on eligibility certificates and tax returns so that money would continue coming. In all, Zompak admitted to receiving at least $830,238 over a period of almost 32 years. Said U.S. Attorney Randy Grossman, this defendant didn't just passively collect checks mailed to his deceased mother. This was an elaborate fraud spanning more than 3 decades that required aggressive action and deceit to maintain the ruse. Zompak agreed to forfeit both the house and the stolen amount as restitution. Wow. I'm surprised he didn't forge an excuse note from his mother. Dear Judge, please forgive my son. He didn't really steal my money. Signed, Donald's mother. Fraud isn't only on our continent's shores. Cinzia Polonia de Leo, a secondary school teacher of history and philosophy in Italy, said she will appeal her dismissal after allegedly not showing up for work. How much work did she miss? Just 20 of the 24 years she was employed as a teacher. The termination was made 6 years ago, but she vowed she will, quote, reconstruct the truth of the facts of this absolutely unique and surreal story. Well, when will she do that, considering that she's had 6 years to get the truth and facts together? Sorry, she told a reporter, but right now I'm at the beach. Italy's highest court has already ruled that De Leo had exhibited permanent and absolute ineptitude. The Italian Education Ministry says it will increasingly strive to ensure that the activity of teaching is carried out with adequate professionalism. Wow. Did she at least show up for the annual class picture? And here's more fraud for you, and this one is even more heinous. A UK man has been jailed for draining tens of thousands of pounds from his father's bank accounts by faking both his voice and that of his dead mother during phone calls with bank staff. A complex police investigation found that during a 14-month period in 2017 and 2018, just months after his mother had passed away, 42-year-old Daniel Cuthbert defrauded his grieving father of more than £56,000 by phoning his parents' bank and posing as both his father and his late mother. Audio footage released by Northamptonshire Police revealed how Cuthbert faked his dead mother's name on at least 9 occasions. He can be heard correctly answering a number of security questions before requesting that a sum of money be transferred from his parents' account into another account. Cuthbert took all of his father's savings, including his redundancy payout, and also took several loans in his name. According to prosecutors, Daniel Cuthbert's father noticed some suspicious activity when checking his bank account and confronted the fraudster about it, but he was persuaded that Daniel had nothing to do with it. However, the poor man would soon learn that trusting his son had been a very bad decision. In 2018, a building company called Mr. Cuthbert to inform him that he was going to lose his house due to arrears. Apparently, his son had taken several loans in his name and never bothered to pay them or at least inform his father about them. In the face of overwhelming audio evidence against him, Daniel Cuthbert admitted to fraud by false representation, and a Preston Crown Court judge recently sentenced him to 2 years in jail. I'm guessing his dad won't be visiting. Said a source from the Northamptonshire Police, "We hope this brings some closure to the victim, who was put through a horrendous ordeal by his son only months after losing his wife." Yes, the younger Cuthbert is not exactly the son of the year. There's a special place in hell for this guy. Anyway, let's get to our last guest here on this edition of the Stuff File program, shall we? Marc Hartzman, the curator of WeirdHistorian.com, is back with a story for the month of July. And folks, if you're looking for a miracle cure, then you've come to the wrong place. Marc joins us via Skype from New York City. Hi, Marc.
Hi, Peter. How you doing?
Just tickety-boo. So what kind of snake oil are you selling this time?
Oh, some good snake oil for this month. So let me start off by saying that this story goes back to, well, we're going to start this story in July of 1901. This was a time when a woman named Mrs. Ida Anderson claimed to have bought a product called the oxydonor, and she said, and these are her words, she said, "In 3 weeks, I was entirely cured of dropsy, 10 years standing. My feet and ankles were terribly swollen, and I was hardly able to be on my feet, and it was with difficulty that I could walk across the house. Since then, I have walked 2 miles at one time. I can gladly recommend it to those who are afflicted." So this snake oil was called the oxydonor, and according to Ida and many others, this thing was a miracle cure for most any ailment.
And I'm guessing that a product called oxydonor was basically promoted to oxymorons.
I think just the latter half of that, just the moron portion. But yeah, this was really an amazing story of quackery, and there have been so many over the centuries. This one had its origins in 1892. It was developed by a man named Dr. Hercules Sanch. Whether or not he was truly a doctor, I don't really know, but it's a great name. So Dr. Hercules, he had something he actually called an electropoise, which sounded pretty exciting because electricity is pretty new. Electropoise, it sounded impressive. And basically what this was, if you can imagine a 3.5-inch metal cylinder closed at both ends, and then a cord coming off from one of those ends. And at the other end of that cord was a small disc that you could fasten to your ankle or your wrist. And if you're wondering what was inside that cylinder, what sort of magical concoction was going to heal you, it was nothing. There's nothing inside. So you would put that disc on yourself, and then this thing would just extend and and nothing would happen, but somehow through the miracle of the placebo effect, people would believe something was happening. And they spent $10 for this thing back then. So he soon gave an upgrade to the product. He decided to call it the Oxydonor instead. The idea of that name was that it was the giver of oxygen. And now he actually put something inside the cylinder. He stuck like a stick of carbon in there. Still don't think that was doing anything other than maybe making you think there was something that would do something. And in this case, you would put that metal cylinder in a bowl of cold water. And then you would attach that disc to yourself and you just relax. And then the oxygen would do its thing, and it would make you feel better somehow. And people were believing this was working. And he had a price hike, of course, with this new version of it. Now it was $35. And just for context, that's like $1,000 today. So people put good money into this thing that promised them mental and physical strength.
Okay,
and the way he ever.
What year again was this?
So we're in the early 1900s, late 1890s, early 1900s, when he advanced the electropoise into the oxydonor.
Okay, so you're saying in the early 1900s, you could buy this contraption, this cure, for $35. Now, if I'm not mistaken, a Model T Ford was going for $200 at that time. That's really...
Early 1900s?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's really expensive, $35 in the early 1900s.
Yeah.
Wow.
Sure. He made a lot of money.
I guess.
Well, I mean, if you hear, his ads promise, everything. I love the language from these things. He promised that this would help everyone these are the people that it would help. I love this quote. He said, from the tired, worn out mother and the overworked and sleepless businessman to anyone else, from ministers, teachers, lawyers, doctors, anyone else who he said toils at work. He did have a caveat, though, that if you were near death from a, quote, organic disease, that this thing might not actually help you. So it might not save your life if you're, on the brink of death. But he said it could help on anything like rheumatism, bowel troubles, indigestion, sleeplessness, typhoid, asthma, hay fever, pneumonia, colds, blood diseases, or, as he said, female complaints or private diseases. This thing was really the miracle that you'd been waiting for, that would make you feel better, as it did with Ida Anderson in July of 1901. Claimed to, and let me just say, for all we know, she never existed. She may have just been another product of his own imagination, but she is listed in his advertisements for it. One of many testimonials.
Obviously, at $35 a pop back in the day, he got pretty rich. Do we know whatever happened to Dr. Hercules? Was he ever found out by the authorities? Were there even ever authorities at that time to find him out?
It's a good question. Well, so the answer is yes. And I'll just say, before we get to his downfall, he was imitated by quite a lot because he was so successful, and it just proved to his success. A lot of other imitation products came out, and he spent a lot of energy reminding people that the oxydonor was the only true one that worked, and that these other products were garbage, and don't send your money there. And one of these, at one point, he actually took one of the competitors to court, and the judge dismissed it, saying he basically said that neither of these had a capability of doing anything, and therefore, how could it be infringed upon as a medicinal product if it wasn't doing anything to begin with? So what happened was that the post office began looking into this. The post office, of all people, it's funny that you say, was there anyone to actually look into it? It took the post office to do the job. And it really didn't have anything to do. Well, I guess you could say it did have to do with the fact it didn't work, because they took him down over mail fraud. So basically, you were sending a product through the mail that was not, that was fraudulent. So that's what brought him down. In one of its reports, I love this quote. It said that the device was, quote, inert as an empty tomato can with a string tied to it, which sounds pretty accurate. And his competitors felt the same fate, that the post office took them down as well.
See, now I'm sure there are people out there back then who said, gee, wonder what a full tomato can with a string tied to it would do.
Yeah.
Empty sounds foolish, but maybe a full tomato can, that's the key.
You never know. You never know.
So do we know?
Again, it's the power of the placebo. It's really remarkable.
Yeah. So after Dr. Hercules was found out by the post office of all places, do we know what happened to him? Did he have to give back the money? Did he abscond to a foreign country with his riches? Did he go to jail?
I don't think he gave back the money. I don't think he went to jail. I think when I was initially reading about this, I think he later may have come back with another product. But, I don't think he totally gave up, but at least it put a stop to the oxy donor.
Wow. That, and I was about to say that's really sad and speaks to the time, but really, scammers are scammers even to this day and age, and they've become more elaborate and more people believe them as time goes on, and especially with social media these days, it's almost painfully easy to scam someone. So it's no more difficult than it was then, or no more easier than it was then, or maybe it is easier than it was then.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly there's more means to do it now, right? But it's interesting that even though we know that something like this seems so silly, but it really preyed on something that we all want, which is our health. And people are always willing to try different things to regain their health or stay healthy. And you see that very much today. And this is just another example of that. Like, if they're saying this thing is going to make me better, let me try it. And people did, and I mean, you can see I have a couple of the ads on weirdhistorian.com. You can see some of the artwork and the language. It's actually pretty fun to look at. But yeah, I think you're right. It's just, it's a bit of human nature to want to believe that these things might help us feel better. And we cling to hope, and we're willing to try new things, even if they seem a little bit, outlandish.
And if he was alive today, he'd have an infomercial.
Oh, well, an infomercial, and he'd be all over social media. We'd be getting served up ads all the time. Yeah, he'd have a field day.
It's kind of sad indeed. But that's the story for the month of July. Once again, Mark, I thank you for being on the program with us and also warning us.
Well, thanks for having me, Peter. I appreciate it.
Marc Hartzman, the curator of weirdhistorian.com. He's the author of several books, his most recent one being Chasing Ghosts, a tour of our fascination with spirits and the supernatural. You can go to my website at thestufffile.com, check out the show number for this program, which is show number 0727, and you'll find the link to Mark's site, plus links to either amazon.com or amazon.ca, where you can order his book directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder. We have more Stuff File news for you right here, right now, before we get to our Idiot of the Day in just a few moments, here on the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder. On July 21st, a young woman named Xiao Hua in China suffered a ruptured eardrum following a moment of passion with her boyfriend. When she went to the emergency room because of loss of hearing, a doctor saw blood on her eardrum and asked if she had any physical trauma to her ear. "Nope," she said. "But when he kissed my ear, he sucked it so hard that it made a pop sound. After that, I couldn't hear in my left ear." The hospital's deputy director of otolaryngology, head and neck surgery, Fu Jie, said eardrums usually heal on their own. Well, that's good to know. Meanwhile, I'm sure that under more normal circumstances, Xiao Hua is appreciative of her boyfriend's amazing suction power. Moving right along, there are still people out there who like to deny climate change. Take this example. Things went literally and physically south on July 11th at a press dinner on New York's Upper East Side in support of Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s presidential campaign. As Kennedy answered questions, someone posed one about climate change, but before Kennedy could answer, Doug Deckert, the evening's host, screamed, "The climate hoax!" which brought a scolding from art critic Anthony Hayden Guest, who called him a miserable blob. The two continued their exchange, with Kennedy calmly looking on, until Deckert loudly released a prolonged fart while yelling, helpfully, "I'm farting!" After attempts to change the subject and more verbal antics, the evening wound down. The next day, Deckert said, "I apologize for using my flatulence as a medium of public commentary in your presence." Yeah. Oh, RFK Jr., the company you keep. Which brings us, boys and girls, to the moment you've all been waiting for. It's time now for the Idiot of the Day.
And now it's time for the strange things adults do. The Stuff File presents the Idiot of the Day.
A driver who police say was doing donuts was recently arrested, and a gun and narcotics were seized, according to the Hayward Police Department in California. The driver, who was behind the wheel of a Corvette C7 Stingray, was spotted doing donuts near downtown Hayward. Hayward PD officers pulled him over for reckless driving, and the car was impounded for 30 days. The driver was also found to be in possession of a suspended license. A search of the impounded car revealed a loaded handgun with an extended magazine that was not registered to the driver. Suspected narcotics and narcotics sales contraband were also found in the car. A photo posted by Hayward Police showed a handgun, several rounds of ammunition, bags of cannabis and pills, and an undetermined amount of cash. Now, why, oh why, if you have a suspended license and an extremely flashy car filled with drugs and ammo, would you do something that would draw attention to you from the cops, like doing donuts? Or for that matter, even having donuts? One reason, and one reason only. You're an idiot!
Gee, I'm only a kid, but even I know you're an idiot.
And that's it for this edition of the Stuff File program, number 0727. Hope you enjoyed it. The website is thestuffile.com, and once again, stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H, where you'll find information and links on all of our guests by going to the weekly Stuff File page. Just look for the corresponding program number, and once again, that's 0727. Email me at peter@thestuffile.com. You can also find me on Facebook and Twitter as PA Holder. And don't forget to check us out on patreon.com, where you can become a patron of the program. Hope to see you back here for our next show on the air, online, or as a download. We're coming to you from everywhere, including KDXRadio.com, TrueTalkRadio.com, over the air on World FM in New Zealand, WLSLLP-FM in Dade City, Florida, KZZHLP-FM in Eureka, California, CKUW-FM in Winnipeg, CFMU in Hamilton, CKLU in Sudbury, Local 107.3 FM in St. John, CHSR in Fredericton, and also streaming on just about any streaming service your little heart desires. That's it. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder, a presentation of Flying Fish Communications. We leave you with this deep environmental thought. If we don't do something about global warming soon, eventually there won't be any ice floes left to put our elders on.